I heard a rumor that mangroves were being threatened by Bitcoin. And I love mangroves. They are the wildest looking trees that live basically in the ocean. They're huge carbon sinks. About 80% of the world's fish catch depends in some way on mangroves. And they provide habitat for countless threatened species. So I called up my friend Alex Lopez to check in on these rumors because he knows about Bitcoin, mangroves, and biodiversity in El Salvador. So here we are, episode 10, Mangroves versus Bitcoin. Alex, so glad to have you here with us. Let's start with a little background information for the listeners who maybe don't know about Bitcoin or what the ecology is like in El Salvador. So, is El Salvador very biodiverse?
In fact, yeah, it is. It's very diverse. So El Salvador is in this region that's known as like a Mesoamerican biodiversity hotspot. It's comprised of about 2 million kilometers squared between Mexico and southern Panama. And El Salvador is just a little spot in all of that huge landscape, but within the region, it's known for having a lot of neotropical plants and species. And it's also a biological corridor for a lot of birds and insects that travel through the region. And Central America itself holds 5 to 12% of the planet's biodiversity and is one of the most neotropical regions of the Americas. And it's estimated to hold 7 to 8% of the planet's biodiversity, right? So it's recognized as the planet's third largest megadiversity hotspot due to its endemic and endangered species and topographical variety. And it's also tied to a lot of indigenous cultures that exist within the region that have, for decades and centuries, protected a lot of these species and lands, known to be home to around 60 ethnic and linguistic groups, the largest being the descendants of the Maya civilization. And they manage a lot of the forest systems in the region and a lot of plants that are known to be indigenous to the land. But a lot of ecological drifts and changes have been caused because of human development and hyper development in industrial cities. So protecting the region and its this biodiversity hotspot is crucial, not just for the region and folks who depend on a lot of agriculture and land, but I think for the entire world because it's such a diverse spot. And if the biodiversity decreases in this region, it causes an impact for America as a continent as a whole. But there has been a lot of change in the last century.
Yeah, I think when I was reading your paper, and I can't remember if you just said it now, but it was called a mega diversity hotspot.
Yeah,
And I think that's just like amazing. That term, like it really drives home that it's, anytime you look at a picture of a rainforest, you're like, "Oh, it's so biodiverse." And it's like that on steroids, right? Like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
just like every little square inch probably has a bunch of species, including microscopic ones that we don't even know what role they play because we haven't discovered every species on this planet.
yeah.
And so it probably holds even more life than we know. We just know that there's a lot of life there, right? Like,
Right, right.
we know that there's life there, and we know that we don't know a lot about it, um, or at least not as much as we could. So you have this amazing mega diversity area, and then you have this controversial thing going on with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anything about Bitcoin until I heard you talk about this paper. And I was like, okay, what is going on, because in my mind, the digital world like almost never intersects with the IRL in real life, right? The real life world. But actually, our real life world powers this digital world.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, I'm sure most people know Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. Um, but can you tell us why everyone is so concerned about essentially using it as national legal tender and trying to mine it extensively, and what mining Bitcoin even is? If you can summarize it simply. I read about it and I was like, oh my God, so many supercomputers.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated. I mean, generally for the international like highlight about Bitcoin or its recent like popularity is because of its lack of regulation. So it like increases access for folks, and as long as you have the technology and resources to start mining Bitcoin, like you're part of this international right community that's investing. And it allows people to be connected internationally, not be hubbed into like these metropolitan areas, right? And I think El Salvador was a perfect spot for that kind of idea of a country that has not traditionally been at the center of the international economy. And folks can go there and it looks like paradise, right? So it's great for marketing, but Bitcoin itself is like other cryptocurrencies, is a digitalized form of currency, and its value is issued by private developers, denominated their own unit of account. It relies on a blockchain technology where transactions are recorded on this network of multiple computers, and they're not just cited in a specific country; they can be all over the world. And through these networks, they spread what are called or known as nodes, and anyone with this technology or equipment can support the network and access some of those nodes. Um, and so this digital asset is recorded and it's not really regulated by one particular government entity. And so that's also a big question about, cybersecurity and privacy, because it's transparent to any user on this peer network. But there's a lot of algorithm and mathematics involved that folks have to be constantly managing. And so that's where it becomes a bit complicated because those peer networks um, require a lot of energy, or these computers that are processing these codes need a lot of energy. And as the access or the demand for these nodes that become cash payments increase internationally, then the amount of programs, computer programs, increases because the mathematical equation gets more complicated. And I guess that's how it's kind of regulated by the whole network of peers. So this complexity becomes an issue in El Salvador because as Bitcoin is kind of what's going to run this plan that El Salvador wants to create, we're not sure, or at least it's not clear what type of energy demand there's going to need for this mining process to happen. And something that's very particular about the plan in El Salvador is that the president and the investors have proposed to make Bitcoin dependent on geothermal energy, which is not something new for El Salvador. Like many other countries across the world living in volcanic areas, El Salvador has been dependent to an extent, on geothermal energy for a long time. And so Bitcoin City proposes an opportunity to increase or demonstrate that potential internationally. But it's a bit complicated because Bitcoin itself has an unclear energy demand. And El Salvador already has met, like, there's not really a gap for extra energy demand from geothermal energy. So they're starting to see a bit of dependence on other sources. Right now it's solar, but it could be hydroelectric, it could be gas and coal again, even though that hasn't been relicensed in El Salvador for a while. And so that's concerning for folks because if Bitcoin City does go full on as planned, there might be high energy demands that might confiscate some of the energy demands from the entire country generally.
Yeah, I so to my understanding, Bitcoin, you get a Bitcoin because you're solving this really complex math problem that like we don't really even need to solve anyway. So there's that. And then uh the proof that you solved it is what gives you the Bitcoin. And the more
Exactly.
people that are trying to solve it, the more complicated it gets, right? So the
Yeah.
more supercomputers you need, and then of course the more energy you need. So it sounds like the more people that are using that are mining Bitcoin, uh, the more energy it would need, which we've seen in different instances around the world where they already have Bitcoin mining facilities in place. The energy growth has been exponential.
Yeah.
Um, and communities are complaining about the pollution from the Bitcoin facilities because, like in the US and Canada, they are run on coal and gas still.
Yeah.
Um, right? Which is just like, oh no. Uh, I'm forgetting the name, but I know I'm putting it in the show notes. Um, Finger Lakes. The residents near Finger Lakes are really upset because their lake is hot like a bathtub because of the Bitcoin mining facility. And and that's in a colder climate. And so I'm imagining, okay, if we're going to put this in El Salvador, what happens when you're running a computer a lot? It gets
Hmm.
hot. So
Yeah.
we're going to have all these supercomputers in the tropics, and then we're going to need to air condition them like at an industrial level. So there's like an added energy need. Um, and all of that, of course, is concerning
Yeah.
for anyone and any life form, because we don't like climate change bad for everything, including oceans, but also the proposal to build a Bitcoin city
Hmm.
and mining facility and an airport in El Salvador is in a bunch of protected areas, including the extremely important mangrove forests,
Yeah.
which provide, juvenile fish habitat, which is important for fishing, and also really important storm protection from the impact of waves.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's of concern to the oceans near El Salvador, of course, but also just the communities that live there, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we still don't know if geothermal, if this city could be powered by a volcano. And so I looked online to try to see what was going on, like
Yeah.
what happened since you wrote this paper. Um, and I found a lot of conflicting news.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have, I mean, this is, if you've seen anything. Some articles have said that the city has been canceled, but some are saying that construction has started on the airport, and I'm like, oh no, the mangroves.
Yeah.
um, so what do you have any updates on this situation?
Only, yeah, exactly. The limited amount of information you have is just the airport. I think the legislative branch of the country approved like a bond, a national bond for Bitcoin to be available to open
Mhm.
investors. And I think it's called like the volcano bond. But that's very recent. I think it's supposed to go in effect this month and next month. And depending on that, they'll see if the maybe more investment will come into the region so they can start development. But it just seems like the airport is the only one that's got an approval and started construction. But apart from that, the rest of the touristy area, and the Bitcoin mining itself, it doesn't seem like it's going as expected. And the other issue is, I think Bitcoin itself internationally hasn't had like a high constant increase in usage. So there's been a bit of a limitation on that for continuing the process. So I don't know. It seems like they're trying to push it forward with international investors, but
Hmm.
um, it's not going as fast as expected.
Hmm. Yeah. So you also mentioned in your paper that there are laws in place um,
Yeah.
that should be able to protect the environment both on land and sea because there are environmental impact statements required and so forth. Do you think they're holding up the process?
So it's not clear either because yeah, El Salvador has its like it's called del Ambiente. So they have their like NEPA or National Environmental Law. And El Salvador's Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, denominated as El Mar, they're the ones who are in charge of approvals for permitting and making sure there is a complete environmental review where necessary. And they'll look at, if there's a dramatic impact on the ecological systems that exist there, and need to, require whatever permitting um, developers seeking to do a project to include a report that considers negative impacts to population, quality of life, preventative measures or mitigation, and also compensation. But for this project, there's like nothing really available. And in my paper, I talked about a particular case in a village in the northern part of the country. And the village is called El Gavilan, and it's a rural municipality in the department of Chalatenango, where folks were facing environmental concerns for a proposal of a solar farm for Bitcoin mining, which sounds, like great. A lot of the projects that the government has proposed are for 100% renewable energy. So, I mean, that sounds great on paper, but when you really look at the community that's impacted, like this village, um, the construction would de- uh, continue the deforestation of areas that are already impacted, right? And they tried asking for like a public consultation, which is a requirement in these environmental laws, but um, there's outlets that have said that no, there wasn't really a permitting process, or no permit was requested from the federal department. And when I looked at El Mar, I saw a letter that they had given to the residents of the village saying that, yeah, we have no idea why this is not in our records. We don't have a permit, but deforestation had already been commenced. So um, that's really frightening for folks, I think, especially in where Bitcoin mining is, or the Bitcoin city is proposed, which is the Conchagua volcano area, where all these mangroves are as well. That's the concern. Like if they just oversaw these steps that are necessary for environmental protection, just for the purpose of getting investment and money for the country that has been devastated by economic loss for years. So that's a just a small example of what can potentially be happening in Bitcoin City.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a real struggle to sort out how to um, get the country's economy moving in a positive direction while also not just going the route of exploiting all of the resources until there's none left. Because there's the like the cash crop type of thing of like, oh, this will give us immediate money, but then there's the long run picture
Yeah,
of like what's going to be beneficial and making those decisions of like, oh, well, solar is great, right? Renewable energy is great, but now where can we put it that's equitable?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those are some tough decisions to be made. And if people aren't following
Yeah.
the permitting process and having community consultation, odds are
Yeah.
they're not going to be made well. Um, yeah, that's pretty tough. So in so the situation currently, the the progress of Bitcoin City is sketchy, unknown, conflicting information.
Yeah.
Maybe the airport has started, but as we wait to see what happens in El Salvador, based on this research, what do you think of the use of Bitcoin globally? Do you think it's worth the energy use, even for countries with cold climates? Um, I mean, I read something that like globally, Bitcoin uses more energy than Argentina in a year or Chile in a year.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, but then like the advocates for Bitcoin are like, well, yeah, we're an energy hog, of course, but that's going to push innovation because, like El Salvador, governments are going to try to jump on renewable energy so that they can power Bitcoin mining. And I'm just sitting here like, are you sure about that? Like, do you really think governments are going to be like, yay, let's do renewable energy for Bitcoin when they don't want to do it for like the quality of life of their people or for climate change or like I don't I'm just wondering where the incentive is, but now I'm starting to get on my own rant and we'll go back to you. Are you
And
concerned about the use of
I think you're right.
Bitcoin?
I think that there's a big issue with Bitcoin itself, that there's not enough information because it's such a new currency, and its implementation globally has been very recent. I think its unregulated mechanism also makes it concerning in terms of what to expect once it's established in a government or a country like El Salvador. And once it enters an international market through as a legal tender for a country, like what does that really implicate for folks living there, consumers, and I think as well as like a lot of people who are living outside the country but send money in all the time. Like what happens to that cash flow? I think in terms of environmental impacts globally, like there's more negative data than positive. And when there's conversations around it, yeah, the main argument is like, well, Bitcoin is going to help increase investment for these poor-stricken countries, and helps them participate in a global economy. But at the same time, when you're looking at countries or the implementation of Bitcoin mining in countries in highly industrial, developed countries like the United States, China, Argentina, or other places, it's really complicated because their dependence, right, on dirty fuels is problematic. But it just shows when the high demand for Bitcoin or cryptocurrency increases drastically, the energy demand is just out the roof. And for a small country like El Salvador, sure, like at the beginning stages, the government was saying even on social media that it was 100% renewable energy, and we have um, unlimited amounts of geothermal energy, or renewable energy, which I think that is really problematic. I don't think a scientist can really base that statement. But when that argument, or I think that mentality, is what's pushing these projects forward, then there is no concern for the environment. um, and sure, renewable energy is something great internationally, but in a country that has a high shortage of water, is because of climate change, has faced multiple cyclonic events during the wet season. El Salvador is one of the regions in Central America with high deforestation, and also a lot of dry spell periods. So, what does Bitcoin mining mean when these projects are potentially going to extract more water than what folks already have, and is also going to maybe increase seismic events in an area that's already highly seismic, and also potentially the deforestation rate might increase, like we saw in that village, because Bitcoin mining, depending on geothermal energy, is not going to be. And I wrote a little bit about this on the paper, but the amount of energy that is being proposed for the Bitcoin city itself doesn't really support the amount of energy that the country depends on geothermal energy at the moment, and the amount that they can incur in the coming years. So the demand for Bitcoin City to the amount that the government that regulates geothermal energy really expects to see in a couple of years is not matched. And so then what they should have made that clear in terms of what's going to really happen, right? And 10 years from now, if we are Bitcoin mining, where's the energy going to come from, and how is that going to impact residents, and is there going to be a shift in the water demand for consumers that's going to be diverted for these projects? So I'm just concerned that I don't see that information publicly, and I don't see a lot of public participation, but I do see a lot of support, and I do see a lot of just economic development um, arguments, but I would love to see the environmental concern as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't you can't have one without the other. Where does the economy come from, right?
Yeah.
Planet. Like, where else? I think that, like, brings us back to the beginning that, you know, this is the digital world colliding with
Mm,
the physical world. Um,
yeah.
the physical world has to support the digital world, and,
Mm,
you know, we can only do that with what we physically have. But yeah, so thank you so much for introducing me to worlds colliding of digital and physical and Bitcoin and El Salvador. That was it's given me a lot to think about and mull over. I feel like I'm gonna have weird dreams after this. Like
oh God.
cars running through El Salvador jungles and onto the beaches. Something,
Right.
not like Avatar the movie, but like, your little funny picture avatar that you make for social media or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been a pleasure. And um, as soon as I hear news about Bitcoin City, I'm gonna be
Yeah.
messaging you like, hey, what do you think? What's happening?
Yeah. I'll be also on the lookout to see what
Yeah.
happens.
Uh, well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Tara. I really appreciate it. This is great. I am eager to hear other conversations as well, and I'll also be on the lookout. Hopefully, there is more information about this, and
Mhm.
hopefully they do match. Hopefully the economy and the digital world does support the environment and vice versa. But we'll see.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, especially to create something new and innovative for
Right?
El Salvador and similar countries. That would be ideal.
It'll be awesome.
Yeah.